Now I cordially invite Ms. Hasini Rathnamalala for only 15 minutes you have, right? You have to stop within 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Today my research topic is need of a human rights law framework for scientific research in Sri Lanka. I named it as double-edged sword, and you will understand at the end of my lecture why I named it as a double-edged sword. Let's see what the double-edged sword standard is. Structure of my presentation is, firstly I am to introduce the research and research objectives, questions, research methodology. Then I will be discussing and finally I am to conclude with my recommendations. The atrocities went on during Second World War, and the horrors went on during the Second World War. I think everyone knows, and scientific research, when human objects became scientific research objects, the conscience of mankind was shocked. Based on that terrors, based on that horrific situations, international community recognized the strong relationship between the scientific research and human rights. There were several dialogues, legal and sociological dialogues on my current research topic since Second World War, maybe even before that, but Second World War was the groundbreaking situation. Then developments in UN mechanisms as well as regional human rights mechanisms I will be considering for my research outcome, and mainly I will be focusing on absence of a legal framework in Sri Lanka with relation to scientific research and human rights. And the research outcome of my research is introducing a domestic legal mechanism to Sri Lanka on the relationship of scientific research and human rights. These are the research objectives. Main objective is to recognize the human rights framework in scientific research which is applicable to Sri Lanka. Secondary objective is to recognize main human rights concepts, and especially United Nations human rights mechanisms, and finally to introduce the domestic legislation in the above area. Research question is seeking answers on the prominent areas to be included in a domestic legal framework which protects human rights in scientific research. The outcome of my research will be a policy paper, since my research is a policy research based. As I mentioned, the research methodology, I adopted the legal research methodology based on the library-based secondary data review. I have to mention here that I am not focusing on medical law aspects as well as intellectual property law aspects rather than human rights law aspects in this research. The background of study, as I mentioned, terrors of World War II on human rights research in Nazi regime. I think you all know about the concentration camps during the Nazi regime, during Second World War, and the way human beings became as research objects, the human research. Then I will be focusing on the adoption of UN Bill of Human Rights, and finally the Tehran Conference in 13th May 1968. I recognized it as a groundbreaking conference on the relationship of scientific research and human rights. I would like to quote one of the outcomes of Tehran Conference. I would like to draw your attention on the time period which this policy paper came out. While recent scientific discoveries and technological advances have opened vast prospects for economic, social and cultural progress, such developments may nevertheless endanger the rights and freedoms of individuals and will require continuing attention. And I would like to remind you what double-edged sword standings of the research. Okay. Secondly, I would go for Bill of Human Rights aspects on scientific research in human rights. Bill of Human Rights, it consists with UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 2 covenants on civil and political rights, as well as economic, social and cultural rights. Economic, social and cultural, 2 covenants came into force in 1976. If we go to ICESCR, that is Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Covenant, in that you can see some applicable provisions, right to enjoy highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, right to education, right to take part in cultural life, and scientific research. Those are based on the developments of scientific research. Okay, that is what I wanted to show you. The ICESCR standards are based on scientific development. When it comes to ICCPR and UDHR, right to be free from torture, cruel, inhumane and degradement treatment, right not to be tortured, right to life and right to privacy, which is very important. Those are the applicable standards in scientific research and human rights. Not only that, but also there were many human rights resolutions UN Secretary General has adopted on scientific research and human rights. For example, privacy of individuals and users of electronics and which may affect the right of the persons, and limits which should be placed on such users in democratic society, and protection of human personality and its physical and intellectual integrity in light of advances in biology, medicine and biochemistry. The report on the balance which should be established between scientific and technological progress and intellectual, spiritual, cultural and moral advancement of human rights. Anyway, until the adoption of Resolution 1986-9 of UN Commission of Human Rights, I would say there were no direct dialogues. There were dialogues and reports, as I mentioned. There were no direct dialogues on in the area, as I believe. If you see the wordings in relation to my presentation, my research, it is use of scientific and technological development for the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. That is the resolution, and it's a prominent UN resolution that emphasizing the relationship between scientific research and human rights. Now, we discussed about the UN framework which is applicable to scientific research and human rights. As I mentioned, now I am going to prove my secondary objective of the research, the proposed Sri Lankan jurisprudence on the protection of human rights in scientific research. I think Sri Lankan, in light of the provisions in Sri Lankan constitution on fundamental rights, the research theme of the relationship between scientific research and human rights is somewhat confused, because the fundamental rights chapter is in Sri Lanka, it's not broadly defined and written in lengthy manner to guarantee certain human rights. Because, for example, in light of my research theme, 1978 Constitution, it has not recognized or guaranteed right to life, economic, social, or cultural rights, especially right to health, as well as right to privacy, which I believe one of the most important rights. At the same time, emerging trends in scientific research. Though our scientists not yet carried out research on cloning and genealogy, there will be a day, tomorrow or day after, that our researchers sometimes may carrying out these kinds of research based on maybe human objects. Therefore, I think the limitations in our fundamental rights chapter posed as a potential threat on possible violations on human rights in scientific research. Therefore, I believed there is a quest for human rights framework in scientific research. If we are to adopt scientific legal document in scientific research, I thought it should be consist with these components which are presented in the slide. Especially, I liked and I thought it's very important among the other UN General Assembly resolutions. UN General Assembly Resolution 2450 of 19th December 1968. It is a clear-cut and it has a very broad aspects, broad weave on certain rights which could be violated in scientific research. For example, consent, informed consent of research objects when it comes to human research, and protection of persons who are who is having mental disorders, and in vitro fertilization and embryos in vitro fertilization and areas like that. Therefore, I thought of extracting certain components from the above resolution. At the same time, when it comes to implementation mechanisms, I went through all the regional human rights mechanisms, but European human rights system, I understood they have a very good, very strong protection mechanism on human research, human objects in scientific research. I thought of taking their good practices into domestic situation, to propose to domestic situations, based on Convention on the Human Rights and Biomedicine. Secondly, 2 additional protocols, Dignity of Human Being with regard to the application of biology and the medicine on the prohibition of cloning of human beings. Secondly, transplantation of organs and tissues of human origin, that is additional protocol 2. But remember, these additional protocols are not, especially the second one, 2002 additional protocol, not in force. But there are very good aspects, strong aspects on the implementation processes. Finally, 2 aspects. It could be the proposed legal framework could be a separate legislative enactment. That means an act, or can be an amendment to the present constitution, since we still did not incorporate economic, social and cultural rights, as well as very important rights such as right to privacy. Let me conclude. Now I think you all understood why I named it double-edged sword, the relationship between scientific research and human rights. I named it double-edged sword because it has 2 aspects, the benefit of human rights as well as violations of human rights. And I saw in my research, I understood the non-availability of certain rights in the Constitution posed every one of us to a potential threat in possible violations in the future. Therefore, I suggest there should be a strong policy framework to fill the lacunae in domestic law. Thank you so much. And these are my references, some of my references in this regard. This is, it says, Charles Lindbergh says, the accumulation of knowledge, the discoveries of science, the products of technology, our ideas, our art, our social structures. All the achievements of mankind have value only to the extent that they preserve and improve the quality of life. Therefore, it's up to you to decide. Not having a legislative enactment on scientific research and human rights is a potential threat to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hasini, discussing most important parts, because we all do research. In those research, scientific research is very, very important. Few key areas, even right to life, not incorporated in Sri Lanka Constitution. 2003 case, Triani de Silva versus OIC Payagala. In that case, it was recognized when a person under illegal arrest, torture, in that case, it was extended right to life. And also the other thing is, right to health is not in our constitution, but Article 12 we can use most of the time. Article 12, where any discrimination happening, then you can, right? Right to privacy, yes. Right to privacy is not in our law, but doing scientific research, there is a ethics and review committee. So normally you can't do a scientific research. Even I am member of a mental health institution, Angoda, where they do a lot of research, but every proposal we get, those proposals, we specifically say, you can't disclose those things because right to privacy is very, very important. In every hospital, they have an ethics and review committee. As well as the body shop, they stopped animal testing also because of this resolution passed by UN. Anyway, it's very, very important, because Sri Lanka, we need more discussion in this area.